Hey friends, welcome to episode 529 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am your host, Kevin Hunsperger, joined this week once again for the first podcast of 2025 by Chad Smart. Chad, welcome, and hopefully the weather in Southern California is better than the weather in Southern Illinois as we are recording on Sunday morning. We are getting sleet and a little freezing rain, and later today, allegedly snow. So I'm hoping to get this podcast recorded, edited, and scheduled before any impending potential power outages. As they have said, this could be a historic winter storm here in Southern Illinois. I'm crossing my fingers that that is not the case because I hate winter.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I can relate. It is freezing out here in LA too. It's 62 degrees right now. I had to throw on a hoodie when I walked outside.
Yeah, that's awesome. You jerk.
But no, hopefully, yeah, I saw that you guys might be getting the shaft this week with the winter storm. And yeah, it just reminds me why I don't live there anymore.
True. What is the coldest it gets in LA typically?
I mean, it gets down into the 40s
Okay, that's
and the
chilly.
overnights. Oh, yeah. I mean, anything below 60 is freezing. Like when I
Yeah.
was having to drive to go into work, there would be days where it'd be like 55, 56 in the morning, and you're turning on the heater in the car because your blood's thinner out here.
Yeah. You've weakened in the last what, 18 years or so that you've been out in Los
Almost
Angeles.
18, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy
I
to think
know.
about.
I know.
Almost 21 years of friendship here,
I know. I was just gonna say that kid I left behind is gonna graduate high school this year.
I know, that's crazy, isn't it?
I know. Thankfully, they haven't tracked me down yet.
Well, we got a kind of a not so much a hodgepodge, but I think we'll probably talk about a few current things before we get into the meat of this week's topic. And we were talking a few minutes ago about collision and before we started recording, obviously. But the start of 2025, we're seeing wrestling on streaming platforms before, more so than ever before, obviously. And of course, as we're dropping this week's episode, Monday Night Raw debuts on Netflix. Uh, it's in LA. You have been on
Yeah.
the fence. You had sent me a message the other day, and ticket prices, which I think is a systemic problem. I don't know how to fix that, but
Yeah.
barring obviously the cost of the ticket prices, I would imagine, make plans to be there, and you may still end up going. Is that right?
I mean, ticket prices have to drop significantly for me to end up going. I was looking, I think it was on Friday night, the cheapest, because I don't want to sit in the nosebleeds,
Mm-hmm.
which are still like $200 or more.
Right.
But in the lower bowl section, there were tickets for like 350. And I was like, okay, they seem to be coming down. Hopefully they'll keep dropping. Check today. Those tickets are now gone, and the cheapest ticket right now is $543.
Oh, so it's gone up about $100 from what you showed me the other day
Yeah.
as the
So,
cheapest tickets you were looking at.
yeah. And, I mean, there are still plenty of tickets on Ticketmaster for face value of 1,800 to 3,000 for floor seats.
Wow.
And I hope that if they're going to drop on Monday, that I can be aware of when they drop and I can, maybe grab them. But yeah, I, I just can't justify paying, you know, over $100 for a nosebleed seat. And I haven't been in the new Intuit Dome, so I don't know what the views are like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to check. But also, I mean, the other thing is on Tuesday, tickets for AEW Revolution, which will be their March pay-per-view here in LA, go on sale. And I'm not sure how much those tickets will be. And I would rather spend money, if I'm going to spend a few $100s, I'd rather do it for a pay-per-view than and granted, I understand that the first Raw is kind of a pay-per-view or a PLE
Mm-hmm.
um, scenario for WWE. It's going to be huge, and it is, it's streaming, so I don't know what the commercial breaks will be like on Netflix, but yeah, I mean, we've discussed it, last few episodes. Ticket prices are just out of control right now, especially here in LA. I don't know what they're like across the rest of the country, but again, when you're charging $3,000 to sit ringside for a TV show, that's, I think back granted, it was 19 years ago when you and I first made our first trip to WrestleMania. And, for a fourth row seat, 3-night hotel, Hall of Fame ticket, autograph session, and breakfast. And we paid half of what tickets are going for now
Yeah.
for a TV show. Yeah.
Right. Right. It is a crazy time, to say the very least. Now, you mentioned watching Collision. I'm assuming you also watched Dynamite. Yeah, you did watch Dynamite on New
Yeah.
Year's Day. They're all streaming now through Max. Are you streaming it, or because you were talking about cutting cable now that AEW is streaming?
I was hoping to cut. The problem is the replay doesn't seem to be up. I don't know when. I know, like, I think for, when WWE would go up on Peacock, it would be like a month after the initial broadcast.
Mhm.
I haven't seen anything about when Dynamite or Collision will be available on Max to watch as a replay. Right now, they only have.
Oh, so these aren't streaming live on.
They're streaming. No, they stream live, but
Oh,
then they don't get archived immediately.
oh, so like if you're not watching on Wednesday night, if you wanted to go back and watch Wednesday night at 10
Yeah,
o'clock when you got home, you would
yeah.
have to wait.
I would have to wait. Yeah, and right now it's still
Okay.
Dynamite is still not up. So yeah, that's a very frustrating
Okay.
because I was hoping to cut cable, cut my TV package, especially since I have to resubscribe to Netflix in order to watch Raw. But yeah, so I don't know. It's one of those things. And plus, even if it's streaming live, I can't record it on Max. So because that's usually the thing is I'll watch the first hour of Dynamite live before leaving my place. And on Saturdays, I never know what I'm doing. I was out last night watching, so I didn't get to watch Collision until I got home at midnight. And so yeah, I wish they would put it up as it's archived, but I believe Dynamite is going to start getting a replay on Friday nights on True TV. So maybe that's why they're not archiving it quickly. But I just, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the details. I wish they would. I think it would make more sense. But
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And you said they have a pay-per-view coming out there to LA in
in March,
March. Is
yeah, they're
that their
not.
next pay-per-view?
Yes, yeah, they did. It's their pay per view schedule is weird. They don't do a show at the beginning of the year until March usually, and then it's like March, May, and then like every month after that.
Mm.
So
Well, and with it, World's End was what, 2 days before the end of the year, or the day,
yeah,
so I guess that all kind of comes into play as well.
yeah, and they do have their Australian show in February that was supposed to be a big deal, and I don't know if that will be a pay per view or since it's been moved to a smaller location, if it'll just be kind of a glorified house show.
Just an event out there, or there
Yeah.
in Australia. I wanted to also ask you about women's wrestling, WWE specifically. Have you watched SmackDown, or have you seen?
I mean, I saw the highlights.
Okay,
I usually don't
so
watch it.
Tiffany Stratton cashed in. It's Tiffy
Yeah.
time now. I am a fan. I like how they have built her up and what they did. The whole alliance with Nia Jax. I mentioned, I think, during our Survivor Series episode that I loved the moment where she had the briefcase in hand and they were both Liv Morgan and Nia Jax were laid out. Would have been an interesting thing there. I'm assuming now that she has kind of broken ties with Nia Jax, which to me is always a good thing because you know how I feel about Nia. But
I was going to say, I thought you would be disappointed given your fandom of Nia Jax.
um, but I again, I talked about it, I think, on the year end episode about the strength of women's wrestling. There's speculation that Charlotte Flair will be back sooner rather than later now. Jade Cargill allegedly is on the mend and will be back in action. So there are obviously the road to WrestleMania. We're just less than a month away from the Royal Rumble. Where do you see things going in the women's division, specifically with Charlotte Flair coming back? Ric Flair has already been touting that she'll be the one to break his record and John Cena's record as the most title reigns. I think she's at what, 15 now, 14, something like that. So
Yeah.
what are your general thoughts on the women's product, and not just WWE? We could talk AEW as well.
Yeah, I fully expect Charlotte to be champion within 3 months of her coming back, because that just seems to always be the case. I Jade Cargill is an interesting one because there are conflicting reports whether she was injured or she wasn't injured, if it's just storyline, which I I mean, I would say if it's well, even if it's legit, I would say the storyline is probably leading to finding out that Bianca Belair was the one that attacked her, and then that will cause the rift and the setup the rumored WrestleMania match.
Mm-hmm.
But we've talked about it before. Like, I there's something about Jade Cargill that is still not connecting with me. And when she was in AEW, she wasn't taking on the top tier talent. She was mainly used in squash matches, and with the exception of, I think, a couple of matches with Chris Statlander, not given in talent that was being pushed. And so when she would jump to WWE, while I thought she would do well, I thought she still had some learning pain or growing pains to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if she's there yet. Like, there's just something about her when she comes out that it looks like almost like imposter syndrome, where like she's trying to be bigger than she is, if that makes sense. And that's, I mean, I think she has the talent. I think she's way more athletic than I will ever hope to be, but something just doesn't connect, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah,
So
I don't disagree with you on that.
yeah. So I think they kind of rushed her into the tag team title picture, and but I do think putting her with Bianca Belair was a good move because it helped, but we'll see what happens with that. Now they have the women's IC and US champion titles, so we'll see if they can use them effectively, or if they become like the tag team titles across both men's and women's, where they're titles, but what's the point?
Yeah, I agree with just about everything that you've said. I think that in AEW, Jade Cargill, that is, seemed like a much bigger deal in terms of the competition. She was almost like that Goldberg type figure where she just kind of ran through the competition, and then when it's time to do something of substance, it's still kind of missing. And I think it was a great idea pairing her with Bianca Belair. I think it's too soon if they are even thinking this year's WrestleMania. I think it's too soon. I still think she needs some of that. I don't know if protection's not the right word, but she needs that kind of mentoring and that, whatever you want to call it, because she's been off now for a few months now at least. And then they're going to throw her right back into the fire, allegedly. And again, if she's not legitimately injured, and maybe it is a legitimate injury. That's one of those things that, like you said, it's been kind of speculated on both sides. So, but I definitely think the talent is, or the potential is there. It'll be interesting to see how they continue to move forward to get her more prepared and more ready. But yeah, I see that look too, of that imposter syndrome kind of thought when she comes out there. I don't disagree with you on that. So, but I find it interesting. I believe it was Mark Henry on Busted Open Radio predicted that Charlotte and Jade were going to be the feud of 2025. It'll be interesting, like I said, to see if they can get Jade up there, because someone else has mentioned that he thought that Charlotte Flair versus Sasha Banks back in the day was comparable to his feud with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, that he being Ric Flair, of course, which I don't see that at all with Sasha and Charlotte. But like I said, I think it's great that women's wrestling is getting some shine. I mentioned this a long time ago. I would have eliminated the tag team titles. I would have never had the tag team titles. I would have done the two singles championships, the US and the Intercontinental, because to me it feels like the women's tag team division is less effective than the men's tag team division, and I don't think the men's tag team division is all that great. Now, back in the 80s, when we had the Bulldogs and the Killer Bees and the Heart Foundation and Demolition and all these teams, and nowadays it's gotten better, I think, in the last couple of years. But the women's tag team stuff, when you're makeshifting women, and now you've taken one of those tag teams of Chelsea Green and Piper Niven and made Chelsea the singles champion. So that was one of the tag teams I felt like they had for the women's division, and now it just feels all kind of, to me, it feels kind of forced. But I'm a 52-year-old or almost 50-year-old fan that is obviously not the target audience here. So
I'm trying to rack my brain and think of, other than Damage Control, what other female tag team are out there in WWE. But I was just going to use your comment about Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair. Sasha is one that now known as Mercedes Monet, whatever. She came into AEW early last year, and I think it took a good 6 months for her to get accustomed to AEW and not be a WWE wrestler. The last few months, her two pay-per-view matches with Chris Statlander were really good. Apparently, the match she had in New Japan out here in Long Beach a few weeks ago. I don't know her opponent. I'm not that familiar with her, and I'm not even going to attempt to butcher her name. But apparently, that match was really good too. And I haven't read the results of Wrestle Kingdom and Dynasty to see if she was on them. But I think Mercedes has come into being on the level of what she was in WWE, and so that's a good thing. And hopefully it translates. I still think she needs a better catchphrase and to stop just dancing the entire time, because that's just lame in my opinion. But yeah, and I think, and I'm going to derail this into a whole nother topic. I think we saw the same thing with Adam Copeland. Cope. When he came to AEW, and even I don't think Christian had it so much, but it seems like anybody that jumps from WWE to AEW, it takes a while to get the WWE out of them. And by that, I mean, WWE is very structured, very, I don't want to say predictable, but their match layouts are very similar from match to match, whereas AEW gives you a little bit more freedom to actually counter. If a guy does a move in every match, you should be able to counter it. You should know that it's coming up. So I think anybody that goes from WWE to AEW, and same way from AEW to WWE, trying to change your mindset into that. And I think as fans, as soon as somebody shows up, we expect them to be great. If they were great before, if you showed up in AEW, people would not expect greatness. You're a former tag team champion, but
true. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the two names that you mentioned, because they are on my list. We're talking about names in wrestling and what significance, why do some wrestlers get certain names? Why do some keep their names when they move to other companies? And the latest and really the kind of the thing that got this conversation, for me at least, going was the other night, the announcement that Adam Copeland, formerly known as Edge in WWE, my skiing partner here, if you're watching on video, I found this Polaroid picture of myself, Edge, and Chavo Guerrero at WrestleMania in Orlando, WrestleMania 24, I believe it was, in Orlando back in 2008. Still doing Polaroids back then, which I know Polaroids have made a comeback, but it's a horrible picture. But anyway, it's I love Edge, and I'm not. It's kind of like when WWF went to WWE. many of us, it's still with Twitter and X, we still call it by the original. And for me, it's going to take a while for me to get to Cope. I just started doing Adam
Mhm.
Copeland, and now going to Cope is going to be hard. So first of all, and you watch and are more involved with
Mhm.
what happens with AEW. Do we know why or what precipitated this name change from Adam Copeland to just Cope?
I mean, they haven't said anything on air that I can recall. I saw some story. Apparently, this has been it was his idea. It's been in the works for quite some time. Um, I don't know if it's, Edge was 4 letters, Cope is 4 letters,
Mm-hmm.
the Illuminati is involved in some manner. And I don't know if people call him Cope backstage. It's because I remember when Sandman went to WCW and they called him Hack, and everybody's like, "What the hell? That's a stupid name." And then it turns out it's like, "Yeah, no, that's my nickname that I've had, for years. That's what people
Yep.
call me." So I just went by Hack. So I don't know. I would think maybe because his last name is Copeland that people just call him Cope.
Yeah.
And um,
Yeah, I want to be careful and not be overly critical because
yeah,
I
I
on the
mean,
surface I hate it. But if it's something that and maybe this is hypocritical, if it's something that the wrestler wants
mhm,
to do, I'm a little less critical of it, I guess, because it is their idea and it's part of their creative process. Versus if Tony Khan or Vince McMahon or Triple H handed them this and said, "Here, you're going to be Cope now."
yeah.
What does Cope do? But it's kind of like back in the day with Chainsaw Charlie. People were
Mhm.
were very critical of Terry Funk. This legend by that point in 1997 or eight, well, was a legitimate legend, but now,
He retired 4 times already.
right? He's wearing this nylon stocking on his head, and they're calling him Chainsaw Charlie, but that was all his idea. That was a tribute or a memorial, if you will, to someone that he knew growing up that was a barber. Then they called him Chainsaw Charlie. So, if that's a way to tribute his family name, I know his mother passed away not too very long ago. If it's part of all of that process, then I'm fine with it. I just thought it was weird. I didn't I don't like the fact that they still call him Rated R Superstar and that he's got his music from WWE. To me, I almost feel like it should have been a complete makeover of everything
Mhm.
because he's still got WWE elements to him, the nickname and the music,
Mhm.
but then he's got a different name coming out. So it's a unique situation. And again, it's not something that I'm going to lose sleep over. I just find it very kind of weird that he came in originally as Adam, like I would have liked to have seen him get another kind of cool name. Like
No
I think
wonder.
Edge was a really kind of cool, sleek name. It had obviously a lot of value and whatnot, but and maybe that's why they kept the rated R part
Mhm.
of it and kept the music to keep that familiarity at least to an
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah. And I think because WWE didn't own it, didn't have the trademark on it, so Adam Copeland now does own it or does have the trademark, and he's apparently good friends with the band that does the music, so they let him license it. You know, I mean, I see your reasoning, but I also think one of the things that we've kind of complained about in the past as fans is when someone goes to another company and they have to become all new, and it's my brain is not working 100% right now because, like I said, I stayed out way too late last night. I'm too old to be staying out till midnight, but one of the things when in the last 10 years when indie guys started coming to WWE and were allowed to keep their names, CM Punk, AJ Styles, um, even the change from Kevin Steen to Kevin Owens was kind of met with like, oh, why has he got to change his name?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we'd look back at the day, in the past when uh, you would have guys jumping and having to become a new character or new, even though it was the same, same person, and you knew it was the same wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
But that change, it's like, and I get it. It's it's because the company wants the merchandising rights and licensing, whatever. But I think if you're going from one company to another, you should be able to keep your character. Okay, case in point, one that just came up is the Dudley Boys. They were the Dudley Boys in ECW, Dudley's in WWE, but then when they went to TNA, WWE's like, oh no, we own the name, the Dudley, even though they were using it prior to WWE, and that's why they became Team 3D, and Bubba Ray became Bully Ray because you have to change, and it's like those. I think those instances are kind of lame to have to change, but with Cope, I mean, it will take time getting used to. I think just calling him Cope it's not a word that really sounds like a good name
Right.
to be used in commentary. Again, if you're just sitting around bullshitting and you like, hey, Cope, what's up? It's one thing, but to be a name that you're going to be repeating over and over, and I'm sure in 6 months, it's like Cody Rhodes's neck tattoo. When he got that, everyone was like, "This is the dumbest thing ever," and now everyone's like, "Yeah, it's still dumb, but don't even register anymore because it's just there." So
I think
yeah.
for part of it, if he had come in as Cope, Edge to Cope would be one thing for me. But then I also,
well, and real quick,
to me is a negative, not negative, but it's like,
it's not a good
it's not a
action verb.
buzzword. It's not a good. Yeah, I like that.
I was gonna say though, coming in as Adam Copeland, and this is the problem that AEW has. You have Adam Cole Bay. You have Adam. There's another Adam in there, I think. I don't know. There's a lot of Adams. There's a lot of Pages, a lot of Cages, a lot of, it's like there's no.
Right. If you let everybody do what they want to do, and that's where, people get critical of WWE being so micromanaging or whatever. But I will say to that end, and I do think it was a bit extreme, like maybe with Shane Helms, we have a Shane McMahon already, so you have to now be Hurricane Helms, or William Regal versus Steven. Steven Regal came in and he became William Regal. So I get, on one hand, the need to feel that you're protecting, and I agree. Like, you have Brian Cage, Christian Cage, Adam Page. That was your other Adam too.
Yeah.
I think there were like 6 or 7 at one point. Diamond Dallas Page, I think, was kind of in and out and still there. And so, it gets a little bit, and for fans that have watched and are regulars, it's fine. But I think sometimes with the casual fan, it could become a bit confusing. And maybe it's not, but I could see where you would want a little more depth in the pool of names and whatnot.
Yeah. And if Dr. Seuss was still alive and if they could get him to write an AEW children's book, it would help out.
Maybe Mick Foley will work on that.
Maybe, yeah.
But name changes obviously is not something new. It's something that is kind of relevant in the news today. We were talking earlier about Mercedes Moné, and obviously Sasha Banks is a trademarked name and IP of WWE, intellectual property. So she can't, they can't just let everybody run off with the names that they helped to build and create and establish. So I get going Mercedes Moné, although again, that's one of those names that I'm just like, eh.
Well, and that's one where I'm like, is it Monet? Is it Monet? It seems to be whoever's saying it pronounces it wrong. And and depending on how the context is, it's like, like saying I'm Monet as opposed to like a Monet. And
right.
That's been the confusing part for.
Yeah, because Monet is a painter. And that's what but I've always heard it said Monet.
But I think she wants to tries to play it off as like Monet, like I'm Monet.
And that makes sense. That
makes sense. But then like call yourself Money. Like don't try to get fancy with it. We're wrestling fans.
Exactly. But in recent years too, we had, for example, Pete Dunne, who wrestled as Pete Dunne on NXT and NXT UK. And then he goes to the main roster and they slap him with this Butch moniker. I don't know how much of the character actually changed throughout, but the name did, and people kind of got crazy about that. Now he's
Yeah.
back to Pete Dunne.
And he's having a
Similar,
good feud with R-Truth, who keeps calling him Butch.
yeah. Similarly with Gunther versus
Mhm.
Walter, he was
Sure.
Walter in NXT UK. Now he's Gunther. People, I feel like, really kind of lost their minds over that one.
Mhm.
And then we go generationally. Nobody minded Bray Wyatt being known as Bray Wyatt. They didn't say, why isn't he Mike Rotundo Jr. or
Why
Blackjack
isn't he
Mulligan
Husky
the
Harris?
third. Yeah,
Oh.
right. But then, Braun Breaker
Mhm.
should be Scott or Rick or
Yeah.
Bronson Steiner, which I get that too. I mean,
Well, let
it's
me ask you
very
this.
yeah. Go ahead.
When Bray Wyatt first showed up, did they talk a lot about his lineage and who his fathers were and
Right.
grandfather were?
No,
I can't remember
I
if
don't
that
think.
was. I
No,
mean,
I don't.
obviously we know, but
Yeah,
I don't know if it was hit. Whereas, with Braun Breaker, they bring up the Steiner connection a lot, and so that's, um, and that's one where it's like if it was a nickname that he was using, or, um, if they just called him Breaker, even I
mhm,
don't think it'd be as bad. But when you're like, oh, this is Braun Breaker, the son of Steiners, the nephew of Steiner. It's like, well, then why aren't you calling him Steiner?
right.
It's so and that was my issue with it. But again, like you said with Cope, it's like at the end of the day, it affects me in no discernible way other than just having to remember what to call somebody. But
Yeah, and it
there are
becomes
bigger issues I will have to complain about than a
yeah.
name.
Well, and it becomes a fun little talking point
Yeah.
because obviously back in the day when guys would jump from WCW to WWE or vice versa, there were certain circumstances where Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, for example, left JCP
Mm.
and went to the WWF for a minute, and they kept their names. But then when Barry Windham did it the second
Mm.
time, he was a tag team champion. Barry Windham in the WWF goes
Yeah.
to WCW, wrestles there for a bit, comes back to the WWF, and they call him the Widowmaker.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
and
then
even and during that point, I remember Steve Austin being on commentary for one of his matches and being like, "Why does he call himself the Widowmaker and wearing makeup? I know that's Barry Windham." And it's
well,
like,
that would have been the Stalker. That was
let's talk. Yeah,
yeah. He came back again then as
that's right.
the
Yeah.
Stalker. But yeah, I didn't know that about Steve Austin doing commentary like that. But he's another example. He was
Yeah.
Stunning Steve, comes to the WWF as the ringmaster.
Well, he
Uh,
lost his hair. He wasn't that stunning anymore.
yeah, he wasn't stunning anymore. But and then if you go by what he has said in the past,
Mhm.
Chili McFreeze was one of the potential names for him. And it is weird how important, we say at the end of the day, it doesn't really affect us, but as the wrestler themselves, obviously it does, because I don't think
Mhm.
Chili McFreeze would have main evented a WrestleMania and become one of, if not the biggest box office attraction in the sport or in the business, um, than say Stone Cold Steve Austin would. And it's a hell of a lot cooler name as well. So
Chili McFreeze, I agree. That's perfect.
um, but then you got guys like, John Tenta, who was Earthquake in WWF,
Mhm.
jumps to WCW and he becomes Avalanche and Shark. And, he gets all these different names, Brutus
Mhm.
Beefcake, all the name changes he went through.
Mhm.
Um, the one that I have always found very interesting is Crush. He was Crush with 3 or 4 different gimmick incarnations, but he was
Mhm.
always still went by that name of Crush. So typically when they change your gimmick, you also get a name change in that process. So uh,
Well, I mean,
I
he
always
went.
find it a bit, huh?
Yeah, he became Kona Crush, and then was it ever Crush with a K
Mm-mm.
or just a C? Just a C always.
Yeah, always the
Uh,
C. Yeah, he was Demolition Crush, and then
mm,
Kona Crush, and Evil Crush, and Disciples of Apocalypse Crush.
Crush. Yeah,
Now it was a K with Chronic. Chronic was spelled with a K,
that's right. Yeah,
but
that was a brilliant gimmick. Oh man, Vince Russo, where do you come up with this stuff?
Um, but and then obviously, like we talked earlier about guys that leave a company and go to another company and trying to kind of keep that identity with them, the big boss man. was Big Bubba Rogers and
Mm,
JCP went to the WWF, became the Big Boss Man, where obviously I feel like his career was kind of laid out. But then
mm,
when he jumped back to WCW in the NWO era, he's the boss, he's the guardian
mm.
angel. They did all these things to kind of Big Bubba, and then they eventually just went with his real name of Ray Trailer. So yeah, it becomes a thing. I think that we try, or we being the promoters or the bookers, try to come up with these names or ideas or whatever for their guys, and then when it doesn't work, we'll just go to their real name. So I don't know. Ray Trailer, I thought was an interesting one of that too, and then he of course goes back to the WWF as the Big Boss Man, and has a harder edge and a bit more hardcore to the true definition of it, becoming the hardcore champion and all that. But
Yeah, and sacrificing a dog,
yes,
and then getting hung or hanged. I guess the
hanged
technical term is
by
hanged.
Cope, no less. Cope was one of
Yeah.
the hangers there. So, but it's interesting, like guys like the Undertaker and Kane and
Mhm.
those guys that we saw for so long. Because even Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley evolved into Triple H, and now he's Paul Levesque, obviously, but
Yeah. It should be
Paul Levesque.
terrorizing.
Yeah, but Kane, stayed
Mhm.
Kane through the evolution of the character, and the Undertaker. Even when he
Mhm.
went to become the American Badass, he was still the Undertaker, which was kind of an interesting thing because he wasn't stuffing people in body bags anymore. He's
Mhm.
riding a Harley, but he's still known as the Undertaker. So I think you build up the brand and the equity in certain names, and you don't want to necessarily
Yeah.
take away from that, or go away from that. So but yeah, I just thought, those were just some of the names out there that, and again, we saw it with The Rock, coming in as Rocky Maivia and then becoming The Rock. Uh, uh, God, I'm drawing a
Yeah.
blank of who I was thinking of also. There was
Uh,
someone else. Oh, Michael McGillicuddy, for example, who,
mm,
uh, again, that's one of those, he's
yeah.
the son of Mr. Perfect, the grandson of Larry Hennig, and now he's Michael McGillicuddy. So I would love to sit in on creative and just kind of hear sometimes what the reasoning or why they're going in a certain way. And then
Yeah.
is it the wrestler themselves? Are they wanting a fresh start?
Mhm.
Did Bronson see, and here's
Mhm.
WWE's problem. We were talking about all the
Braun
Adam,
Strowman, Braun Breaker, Braun.
yeah,
Eva
Bronson
Braun.
Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got all those B names, but Braun, God, now I Breaker. Braun Breaker, did he want to be Bronson Steiner, or did he want, was it part of his idea? Because again, I think
Mm,
sometimes as fans, we see things, we hear things, and then we jump all over it. But then when it's kind of part of the wrestler's identity or part of what they're wanting to do, maybe we give them a pass, and not be as critical of the process. But yeah, allegedly too, Scott Steiner's son is in college playing football right now, but is reportedly going to train and become a wrestler as well. So we may get a uh, new version of the
Steiner cousins.
20 somethings version of the Steiners. Yeah. And if that something like that were to happen, where obviously
Mm,
we've seen Braun Breaker now for a handful of years as Braun
mhm,
Breaker, if cousin Steiner comes in, do they become the new Steiners, or do they have their own names and own identities,
mhm,
and just we know that they're Steiners, but
mm.
we don't beat fans over the head with the fact that they are Steiners.
Yeah. You just call them the dog face gremlins.
There you go.
And but the other one, Gage Goldberg,
Mm.
if he comes in, because one, I know everyone's hoping that the Goldberg legacy continues, but would he beat Goldberg, or uh, is that name, because it's just one name of Goldberg? Is it
Oh yeah.
is it like too big to where you want something else because you don't want to sandbag somebody with that legacy name?
Mm-hmm.
And real quick, going back to Michael McGillicuddy, I want to know who came up with that name and if they ever thought that McGillicuddy would actually work to be a successful, like you were saying, Chili McFreeze.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people do you think would be chanting McGill? Look, see, it's too many syllables. You can't
Yeah.
even chant it. But like there are some names that you just look at and like, this is never going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And a different take on that, where we talked about Bray Wyatt. Obviously, I think I liked Husky Harris' character, but again, he had no tie to the Rotundo or
yeah,
Wyndham name. But I think Dustin Rhodes, becoming Gold Dust was probably the best thing, or one of the
that
best
happened.
things to
Yeah,
happen in his career. Uh, because he found his identity, he became someone else, but again, we talk about it all the time, how wrestling is weird, where uh, you wouldn't necessarily, and there are, I think, celebrities that have parents or kids that have taken or come up with different names, so they're not necessarily living
yeah.
in that parent's shadow. What's the difference between David Flair and Charlotte Flair? Was it,
Talent.
and that's what I'm getting at. Did David Flair have the heart and the desire to do it, but just
Mm.
not the talent to execute it and be that performer? Whereas Charlotte has, I think maybe at the end of the day will end up excelling and exceeding, you know, Nature Boy. But
Yeah. Well, and if David came along, let's say 3 years later,
mhm,
and not have to be saddled with WCW booking,
yeah,
would that have changed things? Would that but I sadly I don't think it would have made that big of a difference, because I don't think David, and this is again no knock on him personally, it's hard to live in the shadow or step out of the shadow. And that's, going back with Goldust, even, when Dustin was the natural Dustin Rhodes, he was good. He's always been a good wrestler, but he was always going to be tied to Dusty.
mhm,
And when he came in as Goldust, I remember it took probably a month or so of seeing the Goldust vignettes and being like, oh wait, that's Dustin Rhodes. Like, but you didn't make that initial connection. So it's like he had the chance to step out of the shadow, and that's where, and I'm all over the place on this, so just
mhm.
bear with me.
Yeah,
It's
no,
but one of my complaints with Cody right now is every feud he has is somehow has to reference Dusty. It's like, oh, I was a big fan of your dad, or your dad was a great friend of me. He's a great mentor. Great, no disrespect to Dusty, but Cody has to stand on his own feet of being Cody, not being the son of a plumber.
mhm, yeah,
And and unfortunately for Dustin, even like now where he's still doing, the makeup and looks more Gold Dust, but goes by Dustin Rhodes, it does like there's a disconnect there
yeah,
of a character, because he's not doing a character anymore. He's doing Dustin. Um, so I think that's a bigger aspect too, is when you're, especially, you know, Rick and Scott Steiner are big names, but they're not Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair. If Nick Hogan had come into the business, you
thank God
know,
he didn't.
oh, come on. I'm sure it would have been a car crash just waiting to happen.
Oh God.
Uh, but that's the thing, is like, there are some people who the name is going to eclipse whatever you do, because you can't fill those shoes. And even Charlotte, as talented as she is, I think she gets saddled with the Flair name, and because she's been pushed so hard, like she's been around what, 8 years, 8 9 years,
Give or take.
and she's on the verge of breaking Rick's title record,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't blame her for that. I blame WWE booking for
Sure.
how much they have to change, and also times have changed. We're not necessarily in the Attitude Era where titles would change on a monthly basis, it seems.
Right.
But we're also, with the exception of Roman Reigns and Gunther, not in a situation where people are going to hold titles for years,
Mhm.
or a year even, for
Yeah.
a lot of it. So, yeah, I think I made some point in there, but feel free to
No, I think it's,
latch on to some.
and I think it kind of goes to proving the point that you don't have to share the name of your famous relative to still get that benefit. You know, I do think it was interesting early on with Braun Breaker, for example, where they were acknowledging Rick Steiner, and I think Rick Steiner even did a little bit of a story arc there on NXT, kind of met a similar fate as the Rock and Roll Express recently did on Collision with getting kidnapped. But so yeah, I think if you do it right, and I do think for the most part, Braun Breaker has been a what's the word I'm looking for? A success story. They have done some interesting things with him, and you're gonna have to help me. Hopefully, after tomorrow, when Raw comes to Netflix, Braun is the current Intercontinental Champion, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, thought he was.
Yeah, he lost it to Jey Uso for like a month, and then
Yeah.
and then beat back because and that was more of the bloodline storyline than
And you know, and that's a whole nother topic of names. You know, when you look at the depth of the Anoa'i and Anoa'i family and the lineage and you know who's related to who, and you know, would they have pulled off Yokozuna in 2024? You know, bringing in a Samoan and putting him in a thong and giving him a Japanese manager and Mr. Fuji and calling him a sumo champion. You know, there are still people that think that Yokozuna was in fact Japanese or a sumo wrestler, or Scott Hall was really Cuban. And obviously, you know, Kevin Nash has famously said on his podcast, you know, Scott didn't speak Spanish at all, other than the few little phrases he threw out in some of his vignettes and stuff. So it's interesting that sometimes the buy-in from the fan, you know, and we believe that. But again, I always view it as they're playing a character. I wasn't offended that Yokozuna wasn't really from Japan. He was, you know, was playing that character. So, but yeah, I don't think today that would have worked with the way that they have built up kind of this Samoan lineage and dynasty.
Yeah. Well, and I would say it also depends on how well the character is portrayed and used, because remember when Bray Wyatt came back and debuted, you know, for the first, I don't know, maybe month, he was getting Husky Harris chants because fans, you know, are smartasses and they have to, you know, prove that they know more than they think they do. But then once the character got established and was being used well, and you know, and Bray Wyatt or Wyndham Rotunda was doing that character to where you didn't know it was a character, let's say, then the fans bought into it. You know, and I mean, the same way the Undertaker, like if you tried doing the Undertaker today, would that work? But did it work because, you know, the conviction of making that character work? Same way, you know, Nikita Koloff, shockingly not Russian, but wouldn't speak English for 7 years because he was, you know, he was selling the gimmick.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, now you have people that will sell the gimmick on TV, but then you go on social media and, you know, they live their real life. And so it's that
social media aspect is going to be a topic for another show that I want to do. So remember this part of the conversation, folks, when we revisit social media. But, you know, back in the day when we were kids and I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know about it until years later when I heard the story. But, you know, Randy Colley, who was one half of the Moondogs, was the original Demolition Smash. And I guess there was not enough time in between going from a Moondog to Demolition, and fans picked up on it despite the painted face and the shorter hair. And they chanted his name. They chanted Moondog allegedly at arena shows, and he was replaced. And he was one of the, you know, he and Axe, I think, collaborated on that idea of creating Demolition, but he ended up getting kicked out because fans recognized him. And that's how Crusher Khrushchev from JCP, later known as Crush, and then, or I'm sorry, Smash, and then obviously the litany of other characters that he had, but he was brought in, and I recognized him because of his tattoos, the Aftermags, because I knew a little bit of Crusher Khrushchev but it was seeing him in the magazines with the tattoo. But obviously it worked, and Demolition is still to this day, you know, doing Comic-Cons and all that good stuff. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting that, sometimes fans don't let go of those guys from the past. And you know, what career path would Randy Colley have had fans not recognized him, or if they did, if they would have just shut up and gone with the flow, and could have potentially made a career altering move for him, so it's interesting. Anything
Yeah.
else on names you want to throw out there, Chad, before we wrap up this week's episode?
No, I got nothing else on names. Yeah.
Well, anything on anything else?
No, I don't think at this late stage in the game. We can
Well,
save it for
speaking of
another
game, we
topic.
do want to remind you to check out our Connections game on the My 123 Cents Facebook page. Join the Facebook group as well. Play the games. We've got, I think, 5 or 6 of them out now, and it's fun kind of coming up with those. So we'll be working on more of those in the coming weeks.
Yeah,
It seemed like you had an idea, a thought idea pop up over your head.
No, you were just saying connection. Yeah, I've got one I'm working on for that I'll send you for Royal Rumble weekend, which I think will, if people play, they will be annoyed with it, but it'll all make sense if you play. So play. It's like the lottery. Everyone should be playing. And if you want to send us $1 to play, then
Yeah,
that would be
prizes
even
aren't
better.
quite as good, but you don't have to pay either. Speaking of the Royal Rumble, though, we will be bringing back the Royal Rumble contest. Look for the details on that probably in the next week or so on the My 123 Cents Facebook page, and again on that Facebook group, and we'll get that going this month as well. We have a little extra time because the Rumble is a few days later than usual, a week or so later than usual. But that's it on my end, Chad. Anything else from you?
No, I am just going to go watch some football, and I will again have Hootie and the Blowfish queued up to see if, I mean, the Dolphins always play with my emotions. They bring it down to the last week of the season to see if they'll make the playoffs. Hopefully, the Chiefs can beat the Broncos and the Dolphins can beat the Jets. But knowing my luck, the Chiefs will all be out partying with Taylor Swift today and put the scrubs in to play the Broncos. And Aaron Rodgers will actually remember that he's a Super Bowl winning champion and show up for today's game.
Well, hopefully,
has nothing to do with anything with wrestling, but I was gonna say, yeah, I'll hopefully find out tomorrow. I'll let you know if I go to the Netflix on Raw, if I can find a cheap ticket, or if I lose all common sense and pay way too much for a ticket, like I did for an AEW pay-per-view last year or year and a half ago. And then yeah, we'll see. I'm curious to see how the Netflix transition goes and what the show will be like. And I still think that 3 hours of Raw and 3 hours of SmackDown is way too much. But
is it going back to 3 hours on Netflix?
most likely, yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, I don't know if they'll have a set time. That's the other thing too. Is like they don't have to be
no hard out
beholden to a time. Yeah, but yeah. And then NXT is also here on Tuesday, but since they moved to CW, I don't get to watch it anymore, and those ticket prices were also way too much for NXT. So
yeah. All right, well, friends, thank you for listening and or watching to this week's episode. For Chad Smart, I'm Kevin Hunsperger, and we will see you next time.